Our lesson today is talking about ordering fractions, and when we order numbers, remember that we can either put them in order from least to greatest, or we could go greatest to least. Least means smallest, greatest means biggest. We're going to look at 3 different examples and talk about how to order the different sets of fractions. We're going to start out with a set of fractions whose denominators are all the same. Okay? Remember, denominator is your number at the bottom. All right? The one that's down. So, if we have 4/8, 2/8, and 7/8. And we wanted to order those fractions from least to greatest, smallest to biggest, okay? Since our denominators are all the same, we can look at just the numerators, okay? And you can look and see which one of those is the least, all right? The 2 would be the least out of a 4 and a 2 and a 7, so that one would come first. Then the next would be 4, because that's smaller than 7, and then your greatest would be the 7, so that one would be the greatest. All right, you can also use your number line, like we've looked at before. Okay, if we put these fractions on a number line, remember that we're going to start our number line with 0, and then since our denominator is 8, we're going to go up 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, this would be 1/8. This would be 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, 6/8, 7/8, and 8/8, which is also the same as 1 whole. Whenever our numerator and our denominator are the same number, it makes 1 whole. So if we plotted out those on the number line, 4/8 is here, 2/8 is here, and 7/8 is down here. So that helps us to see which one is the least and which one is the greatest. 2/8 is your smallest one, it's closest to the 0 on the number line. Then 4/8 is in the middle, and then 7/8 is up here towards the top of the number line, closest to 1 whole. So least to greatest, 2/8, 4/8, and then 7/8. So it's very easy to order fractions whose denominators are all the same number. Okay, you can just look at the numerators. Our next example, we're going to look at unit fractions. And remember that unit fractions all have a numerator of 1. Numerator is your number that is up top. So if I had 1/5, 1/3, and 1/6. Okay? Remember that with unit fractions, the greater the denominator, the smaller the pieces are going to be. So it's actually the opposite of what you would probably think. If we were to put these fractions in order from least to greatest, you would probably automatically think 3 is the least, then 5, and then 1/6 is the greatest, because those numbers go in that order. But it's actually the opposite, okay? If we take a look at our fraction pieces again, all right, here is 1/5, and here is 1/3, and now 1/6, and we look at those and compare them side by side, All right, we can see that the least piece, the smallest piece, is actually the 1/6 piece. Okay, so the bigger the denominator, the smaller the piece is going to be. So 1/6 would come first, going least to greatest. Then the next least is the next biggest denominator, which is 1/5. And your greatest is the one that has the smallest denominator, 1/3. Right? So it's the opposite of what you would probably think, okay? You start with the biggest denominator, then go down to the smallest denominator to go least to greatest. The one with the smallest denominator is going to have the biggest piece with unit fractions. All right, I want to look at one more example for you. And that is going to be a set of fractions whose denominators are all different, and it's not dealing with unit fractions. Okay, our numerators are not going to all be 1. So let's say we had the fractions 3/5, 5/10, and 2/3. If you were looking at those 3 fractions and you had to order them from least to greatest, it would be very, very difficult to do that just by looking at those numbers. What you would want to do is you want to use your fraction pieces, okay? So I'm going to use my fraction pieces to show each of these, and then we're going to compare the pictures. So 3/5, I'm going to take 3 of my 1/5 pieces. All right, 1/5 plus 1/5 plus 1/5 makes 3/5. And then for 5/10, I'm going to take 5 of my 1/10 pieces. 1/10 plus 1/10 plus 1/10 plus 1/10 plus 1/10 makes 5/10. And then 2/3, I'm going to get 2 of my 1/3 pieces. 1/3 plus 1/3 makes 2/3. So if I'm looking at these go with my 3/5, the purple go with my 5/10, and the orange go with my 2/3. So ordering those from least to greatest, my purple, my 5 1/10 pieces, my 5/10 is the least amount, or the smallest. So that one's going to come first. Then my next ones are kind of close, but we can see that my green 1/5 pieces, 3 1/5 pieces are smaller than the 1/3. So 3/5 is going to come next, and then my biggest are my 2 1/3 pieces. So 2/3 is the greatest. So when you have a set of fractions whose denominators are different and you're not dealing with unit fractions, the numerators are not all 1, you really need to draw yourself a picture or use your fraction strips in order to see what that fraction looks like and be able to compare it to the others.